Well, thank you everyone for coming. This is actually the third installment of our Knowledge Worker Innovation Series. We created this event at Thomson Reuters to really bring together innovators in our awesome neighborhood of the Innovation District here in Boston. So our intent is really to invite everybody in the neighborhood to learn more about the kind of innovation that's going on here, and specifically in Boston. And so it's my pleasure here to introduce a panel of startup founders, and the topic today is big data. And so why don't we get started by hearing a little bit of a background from each of the speaker and about their company.
Should I go first?
Sure.
My name is Puneet Batra. I am the founder of a company called LevelTrigger. LevelTrigger is a data science company that helps organizations act quickly and precisely on rapidly changing information. So what we believe at LevelTrigger is that knowing when and where to act is just as important as knowing how to act. So I think if you're the typical organization and you want to make a decision, or you want to change strategy, or you want to improve revenues, there's two real components to that. When should I actually take that action? And then once I've made that decision, what action should I take? So we focus on the former. As a concrete example of that, you can think about retail performance. So a lot of companies care about retail performance. So if you're a national organization, you care about making sure that your locations are doing really well. If you're a lender to properties, you might care that the stores that are using those properties are performing well enough to be able to make sure that the cash flow is coming through to the lender appropriately. And the quicker you know that there's a problem there, the quicker you can take action. So for example, let's say you're monitoring revenue at one of your stores and you notice that the revenue is flat. So maybe not something you need to take action on. But if you're combining that with information about what's happening outside the store, say you've noticed that foot traffic has actually increased 20%, that means that you net have lost some market share. And that's something you want to take action on. So what if you could actually take that action in a day or a week instead of 6 months? That would change the kind of actions you would actually go through. So instead of worrying about how to re-attract customers you've already lost, suddenly you're worried about how you can stop some customers from leaving. So the quicker you can make that decision to take action, the more likely it is that the action you take will be effective. So the origin of the name is, my background is I'm actually a particle physicist. I've been doing data science for a few years now. Worked at a large database company and a local healthcare company. But the origin of the name is a technique we have in physics to handle extreme volumes of data. So I think we're all familiar with these large data streams that are showing up today. So folks are getting really, really creative about what to measure and why to measure it and how to measure it. And one of the problems organizations have is keeping up with that. So this is something that physicists had to deal with at very large experiments. And the way they dealt with this rate of data in the order of a petabyte a second, is through a philosophy called level triggering. So what you do is you focus not on interesting signals or specific use cases, you focus really carefully on understanding what normal looks like. So if we know what a normal behavior looks like, then when anything deviates from that, we can measure it. And so you have a first level trigger whose job is to determine, as each piece of data passes through, whether it's normal or not. Is this something I need to pay attention to? And if it passes that threshold, you pass it to another one, which asks the question in more detail. And that's how you get from a petabyte of data a second down to a gigabyte a second, which you can then start to analyze. So that's the core technology that I think will really enable a lot of organizations to start acting quickly and responsively to changing data. So personally, I think it's very interesting when I look at my own life and some decisions I've made about why it's taken me so long personally to change course. So I was actually in physics for quite a long time, and I wonder, why didn't I leave after that first postdoc? And part of it was, I just feel like I wasn't really being prodded by external signals to tell myself, something isn't quite right here. This isn't quite aligning. Or we've all, I'm sure, had personal experiences working at businesses where the course of the businesses may be changing slightly, and maybe not dramatically enough that it rises above your threshold to take notice, but it's started to change. And if you can provide the folks that have strategy and insight with enough sort of prods to say, look, here's something that you need to take action on, then hopefully we'll be able to correct course and start to really improve decision making. And I think that's really where big data and data science can help out a lot, is in helping organizations change their decision making process, getting more proactive rather than reactive to things that are occurring.
Cool. Sandro, what is your company about? Tell us a little bit about you.
So I am Sandro Catanzaro. I am co-founder and I head analytics and innovation for a company here in Boston, DataXu. And we are working in the marketing automation segment. What we do is we have created and sell a software that enables advertisers to reach consumers in a very effective way. And as they do that, also gain insight about the consumers they are reaching. This is enabled by technology that has very recently been developed that enable you to very exactly pinpoint target ads. So you can very accurately and at a global level deliver ads to through different channels, through display, through video, through mobile, you know, social like Facebook and it's very. It allows you to, at the same time, it's delivering the ads, collects the data, and these are huge, huge amounts of data, and provides optimization. So it can select what is working better and can reallocate resources to those places where it's working better. Very interestingly, it's not only able to create this optimization and gain efficiency, but since it can pinpoint ads and it can show specific messages to specific consumers, can understand, provide advertisers with the understanding of what is working and what is not working. The technology was originally developed by a friend, Bill Simmons, myself, while we were studying our graduate degrees at MIT, and curiously in the Aeroastro department. And the first application was to define the architecture, how to get to Mars. And then later we applied it to the marketing industry. It is very useful to target to process very large data sets, and we thought at that point, well, marketing is a place where there is so much data being collected, but it was at the same time a lot of there was not as much it was not as much taken advantage of, and right now the company which we started in 2007 is about 270 people, so we're very happy about it.
Right, so I'm Hjalmar Gislason. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called DataMarket. DataMarket was actually founded back in 2008 in Iceland, and I moved over here 2 years ago to set up the sales and marketing for the product that we built. So in short, what DataMarket does is that it helps people find and use market intelligence data. For an audience like this one here, it's probably best explained in the terms that we are doing for external decision-making data what BI systems do for internal data. So what's in BI systems is typically data that comes from internal operating systems, and it's typically looked at by the COO and the COO's kind of side of the house. What an organization needs to make decisions is it also needs to understand the external market environment, the economies it's operating in, the competitive landscape, and things like that. And whereas the COO's team is kind of lucky enough to have BI systems to aggregate all this data and give them a single view on all of that, the market, kind of the CMO's side of the house, the insights teams, the strategy teams, the tactical marketing teams, they rely on market intelligence data that largely comes in through through various different sources, but typically in the form of kind of PDFs and PowerPoints and proprietary databases and data that resides in different places on the internet. And we are helping them aggregate all that data and get access to that in one place. So essentially, what comes in through our system is data from all these all these kind of heterogeneous sources, originating in different places in different formats. We put it all together and then enable people to easily search, visualize, compare, and share the insights that they gain from that data. Compare data from different market research companies and so on. So and maybe most importantly, download that data and connect to that data from other systems. So if you want external data in your BI systems, for example, we will help normalizing aggregating and kind of maintaining the connections to those external databases and deliver it into those these BI systems or analytics software in a single format, so you don't have to kind of think about that. Now, the kind of what I mean by market intelligence data, maybe to expand a little bit on that. So we have two main categories of data that we take in. It's all, first of all, it's all about quantitative data and then the analysis around that quantitative data. But I would say you can kind of put them in two categories. There's public data, data that's freely and publicly available on the internet. The kind of rise of open data has given access to all sorts of valuable databases. There are actually more data and more valuable data out there than most people realize, I think. But it's available, but not necessarily so accessible. So there's a discovery problem. People don't know what's out there, and they don't know how good it is. And there's the additional problem of it being in all this different file formats and so on. So the investment to simply see if the data is worth something is big. We help people with that kind of by aggregating that. The second half of the data is what we call the premium data, the data that comes from sources or from organizations that are in the business of generating data or gathering data as a living. These are the market research companies. These are the financial and economic databases and the like. And on that side of the house, we actually act on our customers' licenses. These are databases and kind of this is research that our customers are already licensed to, and we take it into the same tool. So we can give them a single window on all of those tools, but we don't need a commercial relationship with every single data vendor that has data available in our tool. So essentially the solution is sold to the CMO's side of the house, the insights teams, the strategy teams, and the tactical marketing teams to help them access and kind of work with all the data they need to understand the external environment. The analogy I often use is that in kind of an organization's decision making, they have, on the one hand, they have the BI system, which has done a good job of kind of taking the internal signals. You can say that's like when you're driving a car, that's the dashboard. It shows you how much gas you have, how fast you're going, how fast the engine is running, and things like that. But you will really quickly run into a tree if you're not looking outside the windshield. And what we are providing you with is that external view.
Great. So I have a few questions for each of you, and I'm going to pick up on what you're saying here, Hjalmar, and go back this way. So as you're bringing that view from the outside, how is the rise of all this government initiative around open data, is that changing the way you're thinking about your product and thinking about big data?
So it is constantly changing it, but more so it was actually the single biggest trigger for starting the company back in 2008 to begin with. If I were to pinpoint the moment I decided to start DataMarket, it was when I saw Hans Rosling's presentation from TED 2006. Has everybody in here seen it?
Tell us a little bit about what that was.
Has anybody not seen it? Okay, a few people. So basically, Hans Rosling is this Swedish professor at Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, and he did this. It's probably one of the 3 most famous TED Talks ever, where he took government data from the UN and World Bank mainly, and in 16 minutes, describing it almost like a sportscaster, showed us how kind of big data can give us insights and explain the world, how open data can give us insights and explain the world in ways we didn't know before. So he's since done several of these. If you haven't seen them, while you're waiting for the halftime ads on Sunday, you can kind of watch Rosling. It's definitely recommended, so look him up. But anyway, so I think if I were to kind of pinpoint a single point where I decided to start the company, that was then. Just seeing how much data was coming available through these kind of open data initiatives and the potential that data has. And I actually believe that it's not been taken, it's only been taken to a really small part of its potential yet. Again, there's more data out there than most people realize, and it's valuable to a lot of people. Most of the projects that we've seen around open data, however, have been, let me say first, a lot of great things have come out of open data, but they are typically very small pockets. They are apps that help you with your public transportations. They are apps about about different things in kind of the city environment and things like that. But the very few projects have looked kind of holistically at there's a lot of data out there, and we can't have an app for all of it. However, all of it is needed by someone to make better decisions about their lives and about their work and kind of about the policies that they're making. And the data simply isn't accessible in the way that's convenient and kind of efficient for people to search, visualize, compare, and kind of work with in the way that they need.
Great. Well, I'm glad I asked about this. Sandro, so one of the things I wanted you to talk a little bit about is in driving in establishing a company. In essence, you're driving the ability for people that otherwise wouldn't think of it in running A/B testing and experimenting. Can you tell me a little bit of how you're saying that shift in traditionally, perhaps?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, what we do is we collect all the data of interactions that the advertiser and consumer have. And because these ads are digital, you can collect certain things like when the ad was placed, where is the consumer residing. You can also know some traits about age and gender, and what is the content alongside which the ad is placed, and also the type of ad, what the ad says. So those are called in machine learning parlance features. Besides that, we append to that whether that individual actually eventually did something that the advertiser is looking them to do, like going to a website, purchasing something. So you create a very large table that can enable you to create a probability function that tells you, given a certain feature, given a time, given a region, what is the likelihood of that consumer to do something about, after being shown an ad. So you have a mathematical function that does that, and then you also have the value of the conversion you're trying to achieve. And the advertiser may say, if somebody gets an appointment with a dealer, that to me as a car manufacturer is worth $100. If somebody is actually playing just with the engine widget, well, that's like $1, selecting the engine or the color of the car. So if you multiply the probability times this value, you can get what is the fair market value of that specific ad. And that's what we use to acquire ads at kind of a fair price. Imagine you're playing poker and you were to know what is the fair value of each of your bids. You will be probably gaining to the house. And that's what we do. So we help advertisers select where are they able to buy below market value and locate more money there, and where they're actually overpaying and reduce investment. So that's the first way. And if you think of it, there are so many combinations of targeting by content and by how many ads somebody has seen and where is the consumer, that is not A/B testing, but it's more like AZ testing. It's billions of combinations, right? So that's the first way we help them. The second way is big data is complex. So by streamlining a process of data collection and making it simple for people to gain insight and to run this system where actually you optimize your investment, we allow them to abstract up and think more about their strategy. So now you can create two different ways to show ads or two different concepts you want to test, and it's very easy to execute in the platform, and it's very easy to gain an insight. So you kind of streamline the whole process, and they become, instead of thinking, and if you think of an orchestra director, they are kind of directing the orchestra instead of thinking of each instrument in the process of big data.
That's a nice analogy. You and I had talked about this before offline, and I wanted you to help me think about how, for instance, in the financial industry, your company could make a difference in this real-time action taking. So I think you had given me an example about lender risk. Can you tell me a little bit about that and maybe other examples?
Yeah, so I think there was a lot of people are very aware of sort of the mortgage collapse that occurred a few years ago. So one of the problems that large banks have is they might have a huge portfolio of properties, and they want to know when there's some weakness in that portfolio of properties because they're relying on those portfolio of properties to either continue with mortgages or continue rental payments. So how do they monitor that? How quickly can they figure out that something has gone on there? So if there's some correlated weakness maybe in high-density urban populations, how quickly does a bank realize that that's happened, and then what are the actions they take? And so one of the ways that data can help you do this is you can start actually watching transactions through those stores to determine if the transactions are giving you some idea of whether it's a normal process or not, or watching foot traffic outside of it. So I think that's one example of how people want to start using this sort of monitoring triggering for improving their financial holdings. But in general, there's sort of a kind of a spectrum of people that are moving more and more real time from sort of I think some people would call it Maslow's hierarchy. You're either moving from areas where there's a lot of pain to areas where there's a lot of potential. So you see this happening a lot in areas where there's well-defined harm, like credit card fraud or gambling. We were talking about Jeff Jonas earlier. He's the one that sort of figured out how to do that. But you want to be able to stop a bad action from occurring as quickly as possible. And now we're getting to this stage where everybody pretty much wants to move down this latency ladder to acting in a more real-time fashion. I think the question is, where should we prioritize those sorts of decisions?
Interesting. So one other thing I wanted to ask you, and feel free to jump in, but what's the bottleneck? Can you talk about content access, and if that's a bottleneck for your work, and how you're thinking about basically creating value through big data?
Right. Yeah, I can speak to that. So we're actually all about content access. In my mind, there are probably two things that are stopping people from getting to the data they need. And again, I'm going to talk about external data more than data that kind of comes from your internal systems, because there you are in a lot more control. But these two things are, on the one hand, standards, and on the other hand, they are business models. And both of them are lacking. On the standard side, everybody knows this problem. Obviously, data resides in all these different formats, in all these different places, and like somebody said, standards will emerge, and there will be more and more of them. So, this problem isn't really going away. There will just be more formats coming out. So, it's really about learning how companies can exchange this data in an efficient manner, maintaining the right type of connections. And also having the right type of kind of metadata associated with the data when it comes in, so that you can do meaningful things with it internally. The second thing that I talked about was the business model. So two things there. First of all, like I've talked about before, a lot of the good external data out there comes from kind of the market research companies and the financial and economic databases out there. Yet they are very kind of, I want to say, old-fashioned when it comes to how they distribute their data. I mentioned before that a lot of this intelligence, even quantitative data, is coming out in the form of PDF, which means that there are a lot of people all over the world that are looking at something, trying to copy and paste, clean it up, organize and manage the data before they start doing any meaningful analysis. Also, the data, often so that's kind of and the way that industry works, because it hasn't really realized the potential it has in distributing the data in a better fashion, is that the organizations that are producing this data are very much focused on the larger on the enterprises. They're focused on the kind of Fortune 1000. It's actually in the market research industry that connection is so strong that in the tech sector, for example, the largest research providers are almost completely linked to their largest competitors. If HP has a bad year, ITC will have to lay off people. It's that tightly coupled. That also means that there is a mid-market that isn't being mid-market and kind of market of small and medium-sized organizations that isn't being served, because they cannot buy into this data because it's sold at a price in a model that doesn't really allow for that. Another part of the business model is that there is a lot of good data being accumulated in other organizations that isn't maybe necessarily worth a lot to them, but could be worth a lot to somebody else. I used to work at a telco, and I was actually working at a telco when in a strategy position when I kind of started thinking about DataMarket. And a telco has a lot of good data about all sorts of things, even in the aggregate, even without talking about kind of the privacy issues, traffic patterns, when people, traffic patterns, social behavior, social networks, all sorts of things in the aggregate that can be worth a lot to, marketeers is an obvious example, but even to city planners and other people that don't know this data exists and don't have any way of kind of getting to it. So the business models the business models and the formats to make this data available in a way that makes sense to everybody are lacking. And the solution, obviously, data marketplaces, where kind of you aggregate this data in one place, and you enable the business models that are needed, so that a telco doesn't have to learn all the trades of the database, and they don't have to become a data company, but they can still monetize on these assets that they are generating.
So that's actually a good lead to my next question. I think, Sandro, you can answer that since you've had to answer it to create your business model. I think when we think about big data, what we really want to get to is the really interesting things that people are doing with it. But in the process of it, there is all this streamlining, data collection, storage, aggregation, security, cleaning up the data. So what advice do you have, or what sort of the key takeaways in having gone through that process in order to create your business?
Yeah, this is good, very good question. I think the most interesting, most important part to take into account is what is the intent behind the big data project. And in choosing an objective and being clear about the objective and choosing one that actually has a good payback in terms of business impact. And that kind of creates a bit of a chicken and egg problem. So in many cases, there is an organization, and the organization has a lot of data somewhere being created. And the next thing that somebody says, well, there is so much data, there will be value there. So collect it, and then figure out what to do with it. And that kind of tackles kind of the wrong side of the equation. It's kind of, unless you collect it and you invest a lot of money in collecting it and you do an analysis, you will not know when and if it's useful. I think the right way to approach this is more looking into questions, looking into issues that were them to be answered, they will have huge impact in the business. And from there, look to what data will answer those questions. And in many cases, it's going to be the case that you don't have enough data or that it's not clean. But so be it. That's a much more valuable exercise than collecting reams of data and storing it because it's cool to have petabytes. Once you have the data, once you have the question clearly defined, you can understand what type of aggregations, what mathematical constructs you're going to use, what storage you're going to use, cleaning, and all the different things that go kind of upstream. But the first thing is to understand the question to answer and how you are going to get to that answer. Now, there is two caveats here. The first one is it's still valid to have a blue sky project. Just get the data together, it's going to be cool. But make sure that if you do that, there is still a topic, there is a way for justification of the value. In our case, we do that. We have what we call the ad hoc database. So we have two other databases that are for the production business. But there is the ad hoc database. And that database is to help us answer questions our advertisers may have that are kind of blue sky. Can you link? Can you tell me if people are more interested in compact cars or larger cars in the last 2 weeks in this and that region, and how does that has changed versus the trend from the past? So that's kind of the blue sky type of question. The second is, if you create a very streamlined process to answer the set of questions that you define at the beginning, and it's super streamlined, you're not going to collect any more data or create any more aggregations or have any more space in your database. You're going to have a very brittle process. That means that you have the next question you cannot answer unless you change maybe radically your architecture. So part of the job of a very good data architect is to think what is the right trade-off. It's kind of an art. How much extra should I add as padding to answer the potential use cases that may be down the road without adding too much so it's too heavy and it's too expensive?
It sounds like an art. So related to that, Puneet, maybe you can talk about trends in automation versus experts in making those decisions. And I think your art element came in right nicely. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about that and how much automation is increasing, are the new business model rising from that, and so on.
So I think it's a very relevant question, because a lot of times when we think about big data or we hear big data, we kind of also imagine that means there's an automatic solution out there that's going to work for everybody. All you have to do is deploy this magic box and all of your problems will be solved. I think, as the hype has hit sort of reality, that's not the case. And the recent trend these days is to actually recognize that humans bring a ton of insight and value to the entire process. And they bring creativity and connections across different data spaces that will have a hard time migrating their way in a data form into these boxes that can then consume them. So the idea is to understand that you have rock stars, you have analysts, and what you should be trying to do is make those rock stars 10 times more productive. So the tools should be tools that they use themselves to become more effective across the organization. And so one example of this is something now called, it's been around for a while, called active learning. So active learning is a way where you can have your analysts, your rock stars, sort of tackle only the hardest questions. So you're not throwing at them the most difficult questions or all the questions that are out there, just the ones that the machine can't really figure out. And when the analyst comes back to you with an answer for how to break those ties or how to understand what to do with that, that's propagated to the rest of the system. So active learning is definitely a place where there's a lot of interest. And one of the great ways to view that is, big data isn't going to put us all out of jobs, it's just going to make us far more effective. And I think what that does for business models is very interesting as well. It means that when we're constructing systems, we should have those users in mind. And we should make those users a part of our process. And if you as a business can do that very well, it means you can scale out what might be a horizontal, what might look like a vertical solution into more verticals. So you can become a horizontal solution because the user will bring in sort of the last 20% of the solution that you need for you because you're inviting them into the process. So you have sort of a framework that works in one vertical quite well. Users come in and tailor that to their domain, and then you can take that to other domains. So I think it actually enables startups to scale very well if it's implemented well.
I think what you're saying is that if you build a solution that may help people in the financial sector and you're really leveraging that expertise for the last mile, then you might be building a solution that helps people in other sectors.
That's right.
Oh, that makes
for
sense.
Similar problems in similar spaces.
Great. Help me in thanking the panel for this great conversation.